Our village elder heard the last train's whistle, and never forgave himself. You hear that sound, child? Not with your ears, perhaps, but with your imagination. That thin, aching cry of iron and steam, that was the sound that broke a man's heart and bent a whole village's future. Tonight, I will tell you what really happened the day the last train left our village, what Elder Elias did, and did not do, and how that one silent choice shaped every life in Marrowfield, including yours and mine. Because people think stories are changed by big speeches and loud heroes. But our story, the one that belongs to this little village caught between fields and hills, was changed by a man who said nothing when it mattered most. Have you ever wondered, can a single unspoken truth really guide the fate of many? Or is that just another tale old women like me tell to keep you close to the fire at night? Sit nearer. Let your tea grow cold. This is not a short story. It is as long as a winter evening and as heavy as the iron track that rusts behind our houses. When I was a girl, Marrowfield was a place the world only remembered because of a thin silver line of track that cut through the wheat and the dust. We were small, forgotten by most maps, but the railway remembered us. Every morning at 7, the train from the city would heave itself over the hill, its whistle announcing itself like an old friend clearing his throat before saying hello. The station was not grand. Just a peeling wooden building, a clock that ran 5 minutes slow, and a crooked bench where old men pretended to argue about politics and really just watched the world go by. And standing a little apart from all of them, always with his hands folded behind his back, was Elias. To you, he is Elder Elias, the man whose name was spoken with both respect and a little fear. But back then, he was simply the station master to my child eyes, the one who knew the timetables, who controlled the whistles and lanterns, who wrote with careful letters in a brown ledger no one else dared to touch. He was not the tallest man, nor the loudest. His hair was already turning silver when I first noticed him, and the sun had carved 2 deep lines from the corners of his eyes down his cheeks, like dried riverbeds on a tired hillside. But it was his gaze that everyone remembered. Quiet, steady, always somewhere a little far away. As if he heard something the rest of us could not. When travelers stepped down from the train, they greeted him first, before anyone else. Even those from the city seemed to know he was the kind of man who carried small important things, lost parcels, urgent letters, quiet news of births and deaths traveled through his hands. Our parents told us, if Elias says the train will come, it will come. In a world where roads washed away and telegraph lines snapped in the wind, he was reliability wrapped in a worn brown coat. But he had another thing wrapped around him too, something a child senses before she understands. A weight in his shoulders when the whistle blew. A long gaze down the rails after the last carriage vanished around the bend. A softness when he touched the metal of the track with the toe of his boot, like a goodbye he kept repeating day after day. Why would a man look so sad at a train that always returned? You must understand, child, that our village's fate clung to that line of iron. The traders came by that train. The salt, the kerosene, the schoolbooks for our little classroom, all of it arrived with the morning whistle. If the train stopped, it wasn't just noise that would vanish. It would be our connection to the great, breathing world beyond the hills. Perhaps that is why the legend of the last train began even while the trains were still coming. Old men muttered at the tea stall that the rail company was losing money. Young men dreamed of factories in the city and said, if the line closes, we'll walk. Who needs trains? Women tightened their lips and looked at babies sleeping in their arms, already calculating how far those small legs could ever really walk. The story grew teeth long before it grew truth. Some said that when the last train left Marrowfield, its whistle would sound different, like a morning song. Some said no one would hear it at all, that it would slip away in silence, so that the village would not understand its loss until months too late. Children dared each other to sneak to the station at night to see if shadows moved along the empty platform. They said a ghost already paced there, counting the days until the final departure. I never saw a ghost. But I saw Elias. Standing very still at the far end of the platform after the evening freight had gone, his hand resting on the worn wooden signal lever, his eyes following darkness along the track. Perhaps, if I had been braver, would have asked him, "What are you watching for?" But some questions, child, we save for later in life. And sometimes, we save them for too late. The day the last train truly came to Marrowfield, the sky was an ordinary blue and the wind smelled of cut wheat and coal smoke. No sign was hung, no announcement made. To most, it was just another morning. Yet even as a girl, I felt a tremor in the air, like the pause between a question and an answer. If only we had known then what that day would cost us. Years passed, as they always do, one harvest after another, until, soon, became, back then, and people turned the rumor of the line closing into a kind of joke. Soon they'll take our train away, old Samuel would say every time it was late. Better start walking now, Elias. Elias would only smile a small, tight smile and check his pocket watch. But then the timetable began to change. First, the evening freight stopped coming. The postbags arrived thinner. The station office got a new calendar with the rail company's new colors, and some days the clock on the wall simply stopped and no one bothered to wind it. On those evenings, when the platform stood empty and the rails cooled under the sinking sun, Elias began his ritual. Every sunset, whether the wind screamed or the rain fell sideways, he walked the length of the track from the station to the old signal post by the river bend. I watched him from my mother's kitchen window more times than I can count. His steps were slow but precise, as if he knew exactly how many boards lay between the platform and the curve. Sometimes he carried a lantern, sometimes only his bare hands. He would pause where the rails began to disappear into the weeds. There, he would crouch down, press his palm flat on the rusted iron, close his eyes, and stay that way for a long moment. What was he listening for? The echo of engines long gone? The faint tremor of a future still deciding its road? We children invented our own answers. Elias made a deal with the train, whispered Nora, my wild-haired friend, as we hid behind the grain sacks one evening. He has to count every sleeper before the last train arrives, or it will crash. Another boy, sharper and crueler, hissed, no, no. He left someone on the track once, and now he checks every night to be sure they are really gone. You see? Even then, the children could sense that our elder carried something heavy. We did not know its shape, so we wrapped it in rumor. By then, he was no longer just the station master. Age had crept into his bones. The village had named him Elder, which is a kind way of saying, we trust you. We also burden you with all the things we do not wish to think about ourselves. People came to him with disputes over land, with quarrels between brothers, with questions of whether to send sons to the city or keep them home on the fields. He listened, always listened, and then spoke with gentle certainty that settled on our lives like dust. And beneath all this, the train grew thinner, its visits less and less. The morning whistle came only 3 days a week, then 2. Trade slowed. The shopkeeper began to stock the same tins on the same shelf for months because no new goods arrived. Young men stood by the tracks and kicked stones into the ditch, their eyes hungry for a horizon that kept shrinking. Maybe the road they promised will come instead, people said. Maybe trucks will arrive. Maybe the government will remember we exist. Maybe. That's how villages starve, not just in their bellies, but in their hopes. Do you know what it feels like when a place begins to hollow out? You don't see it at first. It is like a house that seems fine until you realize the floorboards sound different under your step. First, the school lost its second teacher. Then the small clinic rarely had medicine. Weddings became simpler, not out of modesty, but necessity. Those who could leave quietly did so, sometimes taking the early train with no farewell, ashamed that they dared to seek more. And always, at sunset, there was Elias walking the track. Rain leaked into his coat. Frost crusted the rails. He still went. Some evenings he would lean against the old signal post and look toward the horizon so long that darkness had completely fallen by the time he turned back. The children who once told stories about him grew into teenagers who rolled their eyes. There goes old Elias, talking to his ghosts again, they would say. But once, just once, I saw something that the others did not. And that sight became the first thread in the knot of this mystery. It was late autumn, the year before the last train. I had gone to the station to fetch a parcel my aunt had sent from the city. The clerk had already shuttered the window when I arrived, so I sat on the bench to catch my breath, meaning to walk home with empty hands and a story about the lazy clerk. The sky was already orange and pink, the rails turning the color of old blood in the light. Elias was coming back from his walk, his hat pulled low. As he passed the station office, he hesitated. Then, thinking himself alone, he stepped inside and did something I had never seen him do. He locked the door. I slid off the bench and crept to the dusty window. Through a crack in the curtain, I saw him take a bundle of papers from inside his coat. Not the brown ledger from the desk, no. These were thinner, official-looking, with a blue stamp in the corner. Letters, perhaps. Notices. He spread them on the table, leaned close, his shoulders tense. His finger traced one line, then another. His lips moved as if reading silently, then he pressed both hands flat on the table and bowed his head. I watched his chest rise and fall, rise and fall. Then, suddenly, with a movement that made me flinch even through the glass, he swept one page aside, face down, and slid it into the bottom drawer of the desk. He turned the key. He held it a long moment, staring at the locked drawer, before slipping it into his pocket. What was on that paper that Elias, the careful, honest station master, had to hide it from his own eyes? I did not know. But from that day, every time the whistle blew, I saw more than iron and steam. I saw a secret folded into a drawer in a dusty station, and a man whose quiet was not as simple as it seemed. Meanwhile, our village declined in ways even children could not ignore. Trade died a little each week. Cousins visited from the city less often, saying the ticket cost too much now that only one train ran. Elderly people stared at the rails and tried to imagine walking that far on their own. The day the company nailed the notice to the station wall announcing that the line would close forever the following spring, the ink blurred under the tears of the women and the sweat of the men crowding around to read it. But there was more to that decision than the words nailed to the wall. There was another notice, another offer, another warning, one that never reached us then. And that, child, is where Elias's burden truly began. You might think that when the train left and the tracks fell silent, the story ended. But stories like ours do not end with a single day. They stretch on, years and decades, through lives lived under the shadow of a choice no one understands. By the time I was old enough to truly ask questions, Elias was already an elder twice over. He moved more slowly. The hair around his ears went white. His sunset walk shrank to halfway to the signal post and back. The train was gone. The station shuddered. Grass pushed through the cracks in the platform. Someone hung laundry on the old semaphore arm as if to mock the past. But Elias still went there every evening. Children now used the platform as a place to race tin toys, no longer afraid of engines. They saw the old man as a fixture, like the broken clock. But we, the ones who remembered the whistle, saw something else. We saw him pause at the locked office door, hand hovering over the handle, and then turn away with a sigh. We saw him trace the air above the rails with his fingers, as if touching something invisible. One evening, when I was in my 20s and he was in his 60s, I gathered my courage and walked beside him. The fields were almost black against a crimson sky, and the air smelled of smoke from someone burning stubble. "You still come," I said softly, matching my steps to his. "It's a habit," he answered. "Some habits stay once they have put down roots." "Do you miss it?" I asked. "The trains?" He smiled a little. "I miss the sound of arrival. The sound of departure is always harder." There was something in the way he said that last word, departure, that made me shiver. "Elias," I tried, feeling the impertinence of calling him by name, "why did they close our line?" Truly. Not what the notice said. He was quiet for so long I thought he had not heard me. Then he answered, eyes on the horizon. "Because the world is like water, child. It flows where there is profit. We were only a little stone in its way." "That cannot be all." "What else should it be?" he asked, studying my face. I almost said, "The papers in your drawer." The ones you hid. But I swallowed the words. I was not yet brave enough to accuse an elder of secrets. So life went on. Marrowfield learned to survive without its railway. Carts took 3 days to do what the train had done in half a morning. Young people like me went to the city for work and came back on holidays with gifts and stories that made the old ones proud and sad at the same time. Time smoothed the wound but never fully healed it. We called that last day, the vanishing whistle, telling it like a legend to our own children, how the final engine had sounded longer and lonelier, how its smoke had lingered like a ghost in the valley. But the legend was made of guesses and half-truths. Who stood on the platform that day? Who boarded, who stayed, who ran too late? Everyone told it differently. Some said no one left on that train, that we were loyal to our land, all of us. Others swore that 2 or 3 families had gone, carrying their whole lives in trunks and sacks, their faces pale, clutching tickets like lifelines. I realized, slowly, that if I asked 10 people, I received 10 versions. It was as if the village had hidden the truth from itself. Why? Years later, when I was already growing gray myself, my youngest grandson came to me with his wide, curious eyes and asked, "Grandmother, why did Elias cry in his sleep?" The question hit me like the shock of cold water. "How do you know that?" I asked. He shifted, uncomfortable. "We slept in the meeting hall last month during the storm, remember? I woke up in the night. I heard him. He was saying, 'Forgive me, forgive me.' I should have told them." The boy mimicked the raspy old voice, not with cruelty, but with wonder. All the questions I had swallowed over the years rose like smoke in my chest. Why should a respected elder, a man whose life had been service, ask forgiveness from his dreams? What had he withheld from us, and why did he still keep it locked away? That same week, I heard that the district records office had begun to digitize old railway files. They were burning some of the paper archives. Burning? I repeated to the clerk in disbelief when I went to town. "But those are our memories." "They are just forms, ma'am," he replied. "Old line closures, notices, technical reports. Nobody needs them now." Nobody? I thought. I do. I begged him to let me look through the stack marked for disposal. He sighed and waved his hand. "Half an hour. After that, they go to the furnace." I dug through bundles of yellowing paper, my fingers blackened with dust and ink. There they were, maps with faded red lines, lists of stations including our own, Marrowfield, in capital letters. And among them, a thin file stamped with the month and year I remembered from the station notice. Inside, I found the company's decision to close our line. Reasons: insufficient revenue, alternate road project proposed, low ridership. The words felt cold, almost cruel in their neatness. This, they claimed, was why the world had turned away. But at the back of the file, carefully folded, was another document. Its heading read, "Special Provisions for Affected Rural Residents." My hands trembled as I read. It said that on the day of the final departure, one last passenger train would run through the closing branch. On that train, residents of the villages along the line could relocate to a new township near the city. Housing and jobs would be provided. Compensation would be given to those who surrendered farmland that would later be repurposed. All residents must be informed at least 3 months prior to closure, the document ordered. Station masters are to assist in distribution of relocation notices and tickets. My breath stopped. My mind flew back to the autumn evening long ago, the sight of Elias locking his office, sliding a stamped paper into the bottom drawer. We had been told about the line closure. We had seen the notice of loss. But no one in Marrowfield had ever mentioned a relocation train, a promised new beginning, a final chance to step into a different future. Why? Did the company forget to tell us? Did the district office lose the memo? Or did someone here, in our own village, choose not to speak? I left the records office with a copy of that document clutched in my hand like a holy text. My heart pounded all the way home. With every step, the image of Elias's face grew clearer in my mind. Back in Marrowfield, I began to ask questions again, but this time, not to myself. Old Samuel was nearly blind by then, his hands trembling around his walking stick, but his memory remained sharp in strange corners. I visited him in his courtyard as he sat under the dying fig tree. "Do you remember the last day the train ran?" I asked, pouring him tea. "How could I forget?" he muttered. "The world grew quieter after that." "Did anyone leave on that train, Samuel?" He frowned, his brows knitting. "I think so. The bakers, perhaps. Or was that earlier? No, wait. I remember suitcases. Crying children. Or was that from the year of the flood? Ah, the days blend together, child. What about Elias?" I pressed. "Where was he that day?" "At the station, of course. Where else would he be?" He stood by the signal like a man at a funeral. "Did he tell people they could go to the city? That the train would take them to new houses, new jobs?" Samuel stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign tongue. "What nonsense. Who would promise such a thing? We are field folk. No one gives us houses for free." No one had told him. No one had told any of them. The relocation train had not been a rumor. It had been a policy, written in ink. And yet our village had been left behind, as if we had chosen abandonment. That night, I went to the old station. The door to the office was warped and swollen, but the lock still clung stubbornly. After some struggle, I forced it open, coughing as dust and the smell of old paper rose around me. The room was just as I remembered, the brown ledger on the desk, the broken clock on the wall, the map with a red line ending nowhere. I went straight to the bottom drawer. It, too, was locked. But years of disuse had weakened it. A good hard pull, and the wood gave way with a crack. Inside lay a thin stack of papers, their edges curled, their ink faded. On top, the copy of the relocation notice, identical to the one I had found in town. Underneath, a sheet written in Elias's careful hand, names, families, numbers of children. Our village. Our lives. A list of who might have gone. And below that, folded once, a letter. Its paper was softer, lined, as if torn from a personal notebook. The handwriting was not Elias's. It was my aunt's. My Aunt Miriam, who had lived with us when I was small, who had left for the city a year before the line closed, promising to return soon. She never had. We had heard she had found work, that letters came now and then to my parents, but the details had blurred in the busy years. With shaking fingers, I opened the letter. The date at the top made my heart lurch. It was written 1 month before the last train. "Dear Elias," it began. "I write to you because my sister trusts you, and so do I." She went on to say that she had heard rumors in the city of a relocation program for villages like ours. Her employer's husband worked for the rail company. They had confirmed that Marrowfield was on the list. She begged Elias to use his position to ensure that our family, and others who wished, could get seats on the last train. "I do not want them to be trapped when the road closes," she wrote. "Please, make sure they understand what is being offered. If you think it is wise, tell my brother-in-law that he must be brave enough to leave. He will listen better to you than to me. I am sending this only to you so that you can guide them with care." At the bottom, there was a line that tore through me. "If I am wrong, and staying is better, then I trust you to choose what is right. Please do not tell them about this letter if it will only fill them with fear." The page shook in my hands. My aunt had given him both a plea and permission to silence her, trust in one direction, power in the other. He had not destroyed the letter. He had folded it and kept it. That meant something. But he had also never spoken of it. That meant more. As I stood in that dusty room with the dusk pressing at the windows, I realized the missing piece of our village's story was not a lost document in some city archive. It had been here all along, in a locked drawer, under the care of the man we trusted most. Why had he chosen silence? Whom had he protected, or betrayed, with that choice? I closed the drawer and the door behind me, my mind made up. The time for wondering had passed. The time for asking had finally come. Elias was old by then. His hands shook when he raised a cup. His eyes, though clouded at the edges, still caught every movement around him. He sat most afternoons on the bench outside the meeting hall, the hub of our shrinking village, watching as boys kicked a ball through dust instead of running to catch trains. I waited for an evening when the air was kind and the sky promised no storm. You do not ask for confessions on days already burdened by weather. Elder, I said, sitting beside him, my knees complaining more than his. Walk with me? He glanced at my face, saw the intensity there, and sighed in a way that told me he knew where we were going before I said a word. Very well, he murmured. To the tracks, then. We walked slowly, side by side, through the tall grass. The rails glinted faintly under the setting sun, interrupted here and there by wildflowers. It was strange how the world reclaims what humans abandon. Metal that once screamed now lay quiet under petals and vines. When we reached the old signal post, he stopped. He rested his hand on the splintered wood, breathing a little harder than the walk should have demanded. I remember when you could hear the train from here a full minute before it appeared, he said softly. First the sound, then the vibration underfoot, then the whistle. Always in that order. They say you still hear it, I replied, my voice low. At night. People say many things, he replied, lips curving wryly. I was in the station office, I said, the autumn before the line closed. I saw you lock the door. I saw you hide a document in your drawer. His hand tightened on the post. I went back, I continued. Recently. I opened that drawer. Silence spread between us like spilled ink. The wind rustled through the grass, whispering along the rails. There was a relocation notice, I said. A list of families. A letter from my aunt, Miriam. At her name, he closed his eyes. The lines around his mouth deepened. You kept them all, I said. But you told no one. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice raw. How long have you carried this knowledge? Not as long as you have, I answered. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no joy in it. I thought, he said slowly, that I would carry it to my grave. That seemed safer for everyone. Safer? My voice broke on the word. You think our life, trapped here, forgotten, struggling, was safer? Elder, did you know what that train was meant to be? He did not look at me. His gaze stayed fixed down the line where, once upon a time, engines had appeared like iron ghosts. I knew more than you did, he said quietly. Less than I should have. That is often the worst place to stand. Tell me, I insisted. Not as a girl, not as a villager, but as someone who has buried too many maybes in her life. I deserve to hear the truth while you are still here to give it shape. Have you ever asked an old tree to uproot itself and explain every ring within its trunk? That is what it felt like to demand this of him. But he nodded. Then listen, he said. And understand that whatever judgment you carry in your heart, I have already carried there myself, many long years. He began with the letter. When your aunt wrote to me, he said, I was not surprised. I had already received notices from the railway company. First, the closure. Then the relocation program. They spoke of new housing, tidy streets, guaranteed work. They made it sound so clean, so simple. He shifted, his hand circling the old post as if anchoring himself to the past. But I had also heard other stories, he continued. From station masters farther up the line. Villages that had gone before us. Promises made and not kept. Men promised factory jobs sent instead to dangerous worksites. Families crammed into narrow rooms, far from fields, their children coughing in the smoke. Once landed people turned into tenants overnight, living at the mercy of city landlords. He looked at me then, his eyes sharp despite the haze. I knew these hills, these fields, he said. I knew our people. I knew that the land, even stingy as it can be, still gave us something honest. I did not trust the neat words on those forms. I feared that if I told our villagers, they might cling to the dream and not see the trap. So you chose for us, I whispered. I told myself I was choosing with you, he corrected softly, but yes. That is the truth. What gave you that right? He did not flinch from the question. Your aunt's letter, he said. Her trust. I took a step back, stunned. She gave you the right to protect us, not to keep us ignorant. She gave me the right to decide whether telling everyone about the offer would fill them with fear and false hope, he replied. She said if staying was better, not to tell them. That they trusted me to guide them. And you believed staying was better. I believed, his voice grew rough. I believed that the city would eat people like us. That the compensation would vanish into someone else's pocket. That men who had never felt this soil under their nails were making plans on paper that would crush us. I believed, too, that some people would leave in hope and some would stay in fear, and that our village would shatter clean down the middle. I believed that if we all stayed, together, we would at least suffer and survive as one. Not as scattered souls regretting two different kinds of hunger. His words fell heavy between us. And so, he continued, staring now at a memory only he could see, I decided not to announce the relocation. I posted the closure notice, as required, but no more. I locked the other paper away. I wrote back to your aunt. You wrote back? Yes, he nodded. I told her I did not trust the program. That our people were not ready to be uprooted, that the risk was too great. I told her that if she wished your family to leave, she must speak plainly to them herself, not through me. That I could not be the one to tear them from their land. And did she? I demanded. Did she tell my parents? He swallowed. I do not know. Perhaps she meant to. But no letter from her about the matter ever reached me afterward. Only one last note some months later saying she would stay in the city, that the work she had found there was enough for one, not a dozen. I thought the subject had closed. But the relocation train still came, I said. On that last day. Yes, he whispered. It came whether I believed in it or not. He told me then about that day. The sun had risen pale, slightly veiled behind thin clouds. People had gathered at the station, more out of sorrow than expectation. We knew the line was closing, everyone wanted to see the final engine for themselves, to say a strange, collective farewell. Some came with baskets, hoping to trade one last time. Others brought children too young to remember, lifting them high so they would have some proof, later, that they had once seen a real train. Elias stood in his uniform, polished shoes, cap pulled straight. He had pressed his coat carefully, as if attending a funeral. His pocket was heavy with unused forms, relocation tickets he had never handed out. As the scheduled hour approached, a murmur spread through the crowd. Down the line, a faint vibration reached the soles of their feet. The whistle blew, a long, low note that sent birds erupting from the nearby trees. At that moment, he said, I wondered if I had been wrong. My certainty of months past began to tremble. The engine appeared, slower than usual, dragging a lighter load. Behind it, a line of passenger cars, curtains drawn back. It was not the usual service, he realized. This was the promised relocation train, after all. Empty seats waited behind glass, ready for lives that were not there. I thought, briefly, that perhaps no one would come, he admitted. That my silence had settled the matter and that the train would pass through like a ghost, its seats filled with nobody, and that would be that. But someone did come. My parents. My younger self. And, though he did not know it then, others who had heard whispers carried from station to station like stray sparks. People had heard that at some other villages, folks were given tickets on the spot, Elias said. Rumors travel fast, even when official words do not. So a few families came that day with bundles packed, faces set. Not many. A handful. Enough to hollow out a small place. Among them was one face that burned in his memory, my father's. Your father approached me, Elias said, eyes searching. Elias, he asked, is it true that this train will take people to a new place? That there is work, houses? I looked at him, Elias continued, and for the first time in many years, I did not know how to answer a simple question. He knew the official promise. He knew the unofficial stories of broken ones. He knew my aunt's trust, and his own choice to keep the village ignorant. And now, at the very last moment, the truth had found its way to the platform, carried not by him, but by rumor and hope. What did you say? I whispered. I said, he replied hoarsely, I do not know what they will truly give you on the other end. The paper says one thing. The world often does another. I did not tell you of this train because I could not promise it would not harm you more than it helped. He watched my father's face as he absorbed those words. Saw him look at my mother, at me, at the fields behind the station. Then came the moment that haunted us all. There had been another person that day. A young woman standing a little apart, clutching a worn suitcase. Her clothes were simple but neat, her eyes rimmed red from crying. My Aunt Miriam. She had come after all. Returned from the city, at least to the last stop she knew how to find. She arrived late, Elias said. Just as the engine ground to a halt. She pushed through the crowd, calling your mother's name. I saw the recognition when they spotted each other. Joy, and then panic. There was so little time. I could almost see it, the station full of fretful voices, the heat of the engine, the press of bodies. Two sisters facing each other across a gap of years and choices. Your aunt begged your parents to come, he said quietly. She had seen the new township with her own eyes, she said. It was not paradise, but it was something. Work in a textile mill, small apartments with clean water. It is better than watching the village starve, she pleaded. Please, board now. There will not be another chance. My mother looked at me, at the baby on her hip then. My father looked at the fields, the house his father had built. Their eyes filled with fear. Love pulled them in two directions at once. And you? I asked Elias. What did you do? I stood by the signal, he replied. Heart pounding. In my pocket, the green flag that would send the train on. Railing against the thought that my months of silence had failed to protect them from this terrible choice. Your father turned to me, he continued. What should we do? He asked. We trust you, Elias. Do you know what it is, he said, voice breaking, to be asked to decide if a family should walk away from their land forever? To know that whichever way you answer, you could ruin them? He had seconds. The conductor was checking his watch. The engine hissed impatiently. People nearby were already climbing aboard, clutching children and sacks. Some who had come merely to watch now felt their courage spark, stepping forward at the last moment. I said, Elias recounted slowly, if you go, you may find more comfort, or you may find disappointment and hardship. If you stay, you will at least know the land that feeds you, even if it feeds you little. I cannot tell you where happiness lies. I can only tell you this train, this offer, is not as simple as it looks. It was a careful answer. An honest one, in a way. Yet inside it was the weight of all he had not said before, months when people could have prepared, debated, planned. My father hesitated, torn apart. My mother clutched her baby. My aunt gripped her suitcase, eyes wild. And then, in the middle of this confusion, Elias said, your aunt did something that would mark my soul forever. She turned to me, he said. She grabbed my arm. Please, she whispered. If they hesitate, if they freeze, do one thing. Hold the train. Blow the whistle twice to delay, give them a moment more. Do not let them choose by default because they were too slow. I looked at her, at your parents, he said, and I felt that I stood at a crossroads where every path was fog. The conductor blew his own whistle, sharp and short. It was the signal for departure. My aunt shouted to my parents, "I will be waiting in the new town. Come on the next train if you must, but come." There was no next train, I said, my voice barely audible. No, Elias agreed. There was not. He had in his hand the power to hold that last train a little longer. To wave the flag, not yet. To blow the station whistle, signaling a delay. He could have bought them a minute more, a minute to decide, to run, to leap aboard or step back with finality. But he did not move. Why? I asked, tears pricking my eyes. Why did you stay still? Because, he whispered, in that one sickening instant, I realized that I had already made the choice for them months before. By keeping the relocation secret, I had denied them the chance to prepare. To sell what they needed, to say goodbye, to weigh things with clear heads. I had led us all to this cliff with our eyes closed. And now, at the very edge, to suddenly shout, jump, decide, felt crueler than silence. I told myself that if I delayed the train, if more people boarded in panic, and if the promises proved false, I would have dragged them all into misery with my own hands. I told myself that my inaction would be less harmful than my sudden action. He shook his head, eyes wet. It was cowardice, child, he said. Dressed up as caution. Fear wearing the mask of wisdom. The engine's whistle blew again, longer this time, a final warning. People on the platform stepped back. Those who had climbed aboard clung to handrails, faces a blur of terror and hope. My aunt stood in the doorway of a carriage, suitcase at her feet, one hand reaching out toward us. My mother sobbed, rooted to the platform. My father's jaw clenched. Tell them what to do, your father begged me one last time, Elias said. But I had no right to command. So I kept my mouth shut. I raised the green flag because not doing so would have been noticed, questioned. I let the schedule, the system, decide. And as the train began to move, he continued, voice barely more than breath, I watched your aunt's face crumple. She stepped fully inside, as if pulled by invisible hands, the door sliding shut. Her arm vanished behind glass. Your parents stayed where they were, as if nailed to the earth. The whistle you heard as a child, the one you still remember, he asked quietly. That long fading cry as the train pulled away? That was the sound of my failure. He closed his eyes then, and for a long moment, the only sound was the wind stroking the grass. Those who left that day, he sighed, built new lives, I later heard. Not perfect, but better than nothing. The township grew. Children from our hills went to city schools. Some wrote letters back, at first. I received a few. I told myself it was not my place to share them with a village full of people who could not go anymore. It would only open wounds. So I locked them away too. He looked at me, his gaze heavy with years. I spent decades walking these tracks, asking the rails for forgiveness, he said. I told myself I had tried to protect our people from a trap. But in doing so, I had built a different kind of cage. One made of not knowing, of what-ifs, of futures never tested. I am not a villain in my own mind, child, he added, voice shaking. I did not withhold the truth out of malice, or greed. I truly believed I was shielding you all from harm. That staying together in hardship was better than scattering into unknown dangers. But belief does not erase consequence. My silence built this present. Every empty shop, every son who left by foot instead of by train, every girl who never saw the city lights, these are my inheritance to you. Have you ever realized that the story you grew up with, about why your life is the way it is, rests on one person's private fear? How does your heart hold that? With anger? With understanding? With both? Standing there on the tracks with Elias, I felt all of it, fury for what he had taken, sorrow for the weight he had borne, and a deep, aching grief for a version of our village that had never had a chance to exist. I could hate you, I said softly. You would be right to, he replied. Many days, I hated myself enough for all of you. But I also know, I continued, that others in your place might have done worse, or nothing at all, without even questioning. You struggled with your choice. You have paid for it every evening on these rails. He gave a tired, bitter smile. I kept telling myself I would tell, one day, he said. When it was far enough in the past that it no longer mattered. But the past never loses its teeth, does it? No, I agreed. It only waits for us to be brave enough to look. The past never loses its teeth, it only waits for us to be brave. He reached into his coat pocket then and took out a small, crumpled envelope. It had been handled so much the edges were soft as cloth. I was going to burn this, he said. Tonight, in fact. I am glad you came before I did. Inside the envelope were the letters from those who had left on the last train. Short notes, written over the first few years. They spoke of cramped rooms but steady wages, of schools with books, of machines that roared day and night. Of missing the hills, the fields, the smell of rain on dry earth. They did not sound like paradise. But they did not sound like hell. They sounded like a hard life with new kinds of hope. I told myself that if things had been truly terrible, it would have been justified, Elias said. If the city had crushed them, I would have been right to keep our people away. But they survived. Some even flourished. It made my choice harder to bear, not easier. He placed the letters in my hands. I do not know if telling this now will heal anything, he said. But my bones are tired of carrying a story alone. Word travels strangely in a small place. Sometimes it leaks slowly, like water through cracked stone. Sometimes it bursts forth like a dam broken. When I told the first person, my sister, about Elias's confession, she stared at me as if the ground had tilted. All these years, she whispered, we thought it was fate. That the train was taken from us by distant men in suits. I never imagined someone here, one of us, held a key. She cried that night, quietly, for the life she might have had in the township, for the grandchildren she might have watched play in city parks. But she also cried for Elias, for the way he had withered under his own decision. We decided not to let the truth rot in corners and whispers. It had lived there long enough. So we called a meeting. In the hall where weddings now shared space with funerals, where the paint peeled and the ceiling fans creaked, the village gathered. Old faces lined the benches, younger ones stood at the back, arms folded. Even those who had moved away but still visited on holidays stayed longer that week to hear what the old woman and the elder would say. Elias sat at the front, his cane propped against his knee. His hands trembled, but his voice, when he began, did not. He told them everything. He spoke of the letters, the relocation program, the fears that shaped his silence. He described the last day of the train, the faces on the platform, the hesitation, the whistle. He did not spare himself. He did not soften the ugliness of his own cowardice, nor the sincerity of his intention to protect. The room was so quiet you could hear the rustle of clothing, the shift of someone's foot on the dusty floor. Some people wept. A few stood abruptly, anger flashing across their features. How could you? One man shouted, voice cracking. My father died believing there was no other path. We lived half our lives thinking we had no chance, no choice. And all this time, you knew? I did, Elias answered simply. I will not excuse it. I wanted to save you from a risk, and instead I stole from you the right to decide your own risk. For that, I am sorry beyond words. A woman who had been a girl on that last day spoke next. My cousin left on that train, she said, tears streaking her cheeks. We thought she abandoned us, chose comfort over family. Now I hear she begged us all to come. That we ignored her? That hurts. But knowing she tried, it also heals something. We have cursed her name for years. Maybe we were wrong. An old man in the corner, who had always defended Elias, struggled to his feet. He did what he thought best, he argued weakly. We all trusted him to decide things. That is what an elder is for. Not this, a younger woman snapped. Not whether an entire village has the right to know its own choices. Voices rose, clashing like waves. Some defended, some condemned, some simply sat with their heads in their hands, unable to hold the complexity. We are not practiced, in such places, at seeing our heroes as flawed, our villains as frightened, ordinary men. And yet, in that chaos, something important happened. We stopped telling the story of the last train as a legend, something that happened to us from the outside. We began to tell it as a human story, with faces and motives and mistakes. Have you noticed how different it feels when history has a name, a voice, a trembling hand? In the days that followed, resentment simmered. Some people could not bring themselves to greet Elias. Others visited him more often than before, as if sensing that his days were few and his need for company great. Youth from the village, curious about this newly complicated past, began to dig through the old station more thoroughly. They cleaned the office, mapped the walls, photographed the letters. Someone remarked that our story ought to be recorded properly, not just passed from mouth to ear until it worked again. A schoolteacher from the town agreed to help. Together, they created a small exhibition in the abandoned waiting room. On one wall, they pinned copies of the railway documents, the closure notice, the relocation plan. Below them, they placed the letter from my aunt, with her permission from beyond the grave, carried in the blessing of her children who still lived in the township. Beside it were the letters from those who had left on the last train, their words now read aloud, not hidden. People came from nearby villages to see this odd little museum of our mistake. Some laughed at the grand title we gave it, The Day of Unchosen Roads. But they did not laugh when they read. Our own children stood in front of those pages, tracing the typed lines with their fingers, eyes wide. So it was not just fate, one asked me. It was a person's choice. Yes, I said. A choice made in fear and love, both. Those are the most dangerous kind. We could not rewind time. We could not put people back on that platform and give them the announcement they never heard. But we could do something else. We could learn from it. At the next local election, when officials came with glossy brochures promising new roads, new wells, new this and that, the villagers of Marrowfield did not nod politely and accept vague words. They asked questions. Many questions. How will this be funded? They demanded. What happened to the last village you tried this in? Can we speak to them? Show us the contracts. We will take copies and discuss them ourselves before we agree. Officials, used to polite acquiescence, fumbled at first. But word spread that Marrowfield was no longer sleepy and trusting. We had been burned once by one of our own. We would not be lulled again, not by strangers. Some plans fell apart under scrutiny. Others, built more honestly, endured. We gained a decent road at last, not overnight, but steadily. A small bus route began to connect us to the town. No train whistles, but the rumble of engines returning. Children from Marrowfield now attend schools beyond our valley. Some come back. Some don't. But whatever they choose, they do so knowing the options, not living in the shadow of secrets. And Elias? He did not live much longer after his confession. It was as if, once the story had been lifted from his shoulders, his body saw its chance to rest at last. In his final weeks, many people visited. Some to forgive, some simply to sit in silence. A few, still too wounded, stayed away. That is their right. Forgiveness is not an obligation, it is a gift one can give or withhold. I went often. We would sit in his dim little room, where the sound of the wind through the shutters almost resembled, if you listened with squinted ears, the far-off whisper of a train. One evening, he said, "Do you think they will remember me as the man who stole their future?" I think, I answered, that they will remember you as a man who was given too much trust and not enough help. A man who made a terrible choice in a hard time. A man who tried to carry a village on his back and broke under the weight. That does not sound very noble, he murmured. It sounds human, I said. He smiled faintly. Human, he repeated. Perhaps that is all I ever really was. When we hide the truth to protect people, we also steal their choice. When he died, we buried him on the hill that overlooks the silent tracks. Some wanted to place his railway cap on the grave. Others objected, saying it was a symbol of the choice he regretted. In the end, we did something different. We laid the green flag there instead. Not in honor of the day he raised it and let the train go, but as a reminder that signals mean nothing if only one person can see them. That from now on, in Marrowfield, decisions would not be made by one elder in a locked room, but by many eyes around a common table. So, child, when you walk by those rusted rails and hear the wind whistle along them, remember this: the secret of the last train was not just that some paper offered us a way out. It was that one man's silence, born of love, fear, and pride, turned that offer into a ghost. Can a single unspoken truth shape an entire community's fate? You know now that it can. But there is another side to this story. By speaking that truth at last, by airing the guilt and the pain in the open hall where everyone could see it, we changed our fate again. Not as dramatically as a roaring engine, perhaps. More like the slow, patient turning of a wheel. We cannot bring the train back. We cannot board that lost carriage and see who we might have been. But we can teach our children, and you, to ask questions, to demand honesty, to share burdens instead of placing them on one pair of aging shoulders. And in that way, perhaps, our little village is being reborn, not in steel and steam, but in courage and clear eyes. So when you hear stories from old lips like mine, listen not only for the romance of the past, but for the quiet places where someone did not speak. There, in the hush between words, is where destinies are often rewritten. If this story has settled into some corner of your heart, if you felt the weight of that whistle and the relief of the confession, tap that little like button so more wandering souls can find their way here to dust of old days. And if you wish to hear more village secrets, more grandmother tales of love, regret, and the choices that haunt us, subscribe and sit with us often. We have many long evenings yet to share. Because as long as we keep telling these stories aloud, no train, no road, no silence will ever again be able to decide our future without us.